All right, this is Juan Valdez, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
Yeah, this is an interesting episode. We've got a guy named
episode.
and what we're doing to protect his identity is not have him on camera, and also to not use his real name, only just his gender that he's a his. And he is, I guess you would call him a recovering trafficker of drugs. And so we're going to talk to him on the topic of trafficking, the U.S. border, international policy, and all these kind of things. So I'm just going to set it up, Juan, and have you talk to us about narco trafficking. And I'm just going to let you go, and then I'll just break in when I need to.
Sure. Narco trafficking today is vastly different than it was, say, 10 years ago, 11 years ago, when the so-called war from Mexico started on drugs. It's no longer big cartel. It's no longer 4 or 5 large organizations working in tandem in order to get drugs into the U.S. Now it's broken down into smaller confederated groups that loosely affiliate themselves with 2 larger organizations, one being the Sinaloa cartel and the other one being Cartel Jalisco. Both these are now transnational. Both those organizations have infiltrated politics up and down South and Central America to the points that you no longer have organizations in Colombia running their own show. You no longer have organizations in Central America running their own show. And so they've used these smaller groups to further their efforts to get drugs into the United States, and they've branched out into other crimes, oil theft, extortion, and they have set up a system of parallel governments to where now they can operate with impunity. It's just a matter of who can pay more and who likes who at what time.
When you say parallel governments, parallel economies, these things are happening, they're expanding. Are they expanding because it's getting harder to move drugs and people, I'm assuming? Or is it just that they're looking for new verticals to get into to maximize profit?
Both. By parallel government, what I mean is you can take Reynosa, for example. There's a mayor in Reynosa, and he's the one that's elected by the citizenry there, and he's supposedly the one that dictates how that city is ran. However, there's somebody in that plaza who is not elected, who is affiliated with one of the groups from either the, and I'll say so-called Gulf Cartel because they've broken up into smaller factions, or the Cartel Noeste. And that person is actually the one that dictates the policy in that city. That person is the one that the mayor is going to call and say, hey, I don't want this to happen, or I need this to happen. And so there's no longer the government that you and I would know and identify here in the United States down there.
When you talk about these shadow governments, does the U.S. have any influence with these cartel figures or the legitimate government of Mexico in a way that would limit the damage that's being done in the U.S. through these illegal activities?
Again, I'm not in a position to where I would know at a high level what the U.S. policy, how it affects the Mexican government. But what I can tell you is that in some ways they can, in some ways they can't. The government from top bottom and vice versa has been corrupted in Mexico to the point that some of the people that the U.S. has put trust in, Juan Carlos de la Cruz, for example, he was the head of the intelligence apparatus for the federal police. Just been indicted. He fed secrets that he was privy to via the DEA to members of different cartels. So now it's not a matter of if they can affect change, it's a matter of who they can trust to affect change. So it's a shaky situation all the way around.
Is business good in the trafficking business, or is it always on the edge of collapse?
Legitimate businesses, they are struggling. If you're a legitimate business owner and you have any kind of success, you're going to draw the attention of the organized crime groups in that area. These organized crime groups, especially the smaller factions, since they're localized, they have been these relationships they have with the government and the people in those cities have been around for 10, sometimes 20, 30 years. So to be able to keep your success a secret is next to impossible, and so I would venture to say 90% of the people who have anything successful going on in Mexico are going to get a knock at the door at some point, and somebody's going to ask them to pay. So legitimately, it's hard. You're just going to have to budget a tax that you're going to pay to whatever group, and then you're going to have to worry about complaining to them when something goes wrong. But on the cartel side of it, it's great. The immigration crisis is probably tripled what they make in a month.
Why has it tripled with the immigration crisis? What is driving the business to I mean, triple is heck, that's everybody's goal.
Right, yeah, absolutely. I mean, they have a pretty sound business model, and I don't want to blame this on American politics, but when Biden had announced, or in a roundabout way, said that he would open America's borders, and whether or not, in whatever sense that you meant it, you have to understand that people in Central America and South America do not watch US television. They don't understand the language, nor do they care to, so they don't hear the messages in detail given by this administration. All they hear is word of mouth saying, now is the time to come, pack your bags up. We need to get there. And so, I mean, as everybody can see on the news, there's a large influx of people. And those cities and border regions on the US Mexico border are ran by organized crime. So some of these people don't even want to traffic drugs anymore when they can traffic people. And it's a renewable resource. You're going to get caught eventually. You may or may not, but you'll get sent back and you might try it again right now because you know Biden is the one calling the shots and you think that you can chance it. So it's just an influx of people coming across that border right now. It's gotten to the point now where some of these criminal groups have started issuing wristbands so they can figure out who paid who and who is underneath the protection of who and when they need to cross. The cartels have had so many people coming into their area of operations that they've actually had to adjust their business models fit the number of people that they're having to cross on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis.
How long can the cartels exploit the people of Mexico, exploit people from other countries that want to get through Mexico before it just collapses? I mean, any government that ignores the people as much as it seems like and abuse the people as much as they seem to be doing, at some point there's a reckoning, whether people rise up, other governments get involved, something is going to change. How long can this go on for?
I really couldn't give you a definite answer. You've had different auto defensive groups, different vigilante groups in, say, Michoacan, and those started off as a popular people movement. They had gotten tired of the lack of law enforcement intervention into the affairs of the cartels in those areas, and they didn't have a way to fund it. And the only way they knew to fund it was to sell drugs and extort people. So now you have three or four cartels in the area that masquerade themselves as vigilante groups that take justice into their own hands. The Chiapas Highlands are the same way. So the answer to that is I don't know. That culture is so ingrained in the population down there that it's fear, and there's gun control down there, so the population can't say, "Hey, I'm tired of this. I'm going to pick up my phone and call some friends of mine. I'm going to go buy some guns, and we're going to handle it." They can't do that. They have to rely on the police and the military, which are the only ones for guns. So I really don't see an end to it, save for U.S. military intervention.
We'll get into the military intervention here in a minute, but I do want to ask a couple more questions about this exploitation of the people of Mexico. Does it matter in terms of U.S. policy and the impact on the trafficking business? Does it matter if it's a Biden, if it's a Trump, if it's a Republican, if it's a Democrat? Does that make any difference, or does the model just evolve each time the new president and the new party is in power?
It's going to evolve, or it's going to evolve, and depending on what organization you're in, is going to dictate how you operate. The current president, AMLO, he, from my opinion, has a pretty weak backbone. He had given a kind of a logos or a saying for Michoacan and Jalisco specifically, because there's a large armed conflict going on over there right now. And he said, hugs, not guns, which kind of told you everything you needed to know, because nobody is going to believe that one of these sicarios is going to agree to that. These organizations, they change. They know who's coming to power. They know how they operate. They pay the people who aren't elected, so they have a pretty good idea of where they need to go and what they need to do.
So there must be some kind of power structure that you all navigate as you work within it. Can you illustrate how flat or how deep the organization is that you're working with as a trafficker? And then also, how many organizations are there? I mean, we say cartels, but I don't know exactly what that means or how many there might be on the books.
Okay, cartels. Now, cartel is a broad term for any organized crime group in Mexico. There used to be just the main factions. There was Cartel Sinaloa, Cartel Jalisco, the Zeta, the Gulf Cartel, and then remnants of, say, La Familia, the Templarios. So I would say seven. Now it has gone to, there is probably one for each state, some more powerful than others. And now you see an alignment of cartels. I'll use the Gulf Cartel. They have a large faction called Los Metros, and they have aligned themselves with Cartel Jalisco, whereas other elements of the Gulf Cartel do not want to operate under the supervision or guidance of Cartel Jalisco. So they actually fight amongst themselves. The organization that I have worked with in the past has been Cartel Sinaloa, which they have done an incredibly good job of not only centralizing their power within the state of Sinaloa, but being able to project that across the United States as well as to other countries using these smaller organizations. And the way that will work, say, for example, myself, I'm in America. So if you're in Sinaloa and you need something done up here, it doesn't make sense for you to send people across the border and go through that hassle when you can simply have a phone roster and say, hey, let me call the people I know that do the same thing in that area and see if they know anybody in the United States and in the area that they need something done with. And they'll say, hey, I happen to know this guy. And they'll call me and it'll just be a price. They'll say, this is what I need done. Can you help me out? I'll give you this amount of money. I'll send this amount of narcotics, however, whatever agreement you come with, and then I will do what needs to be done here, and then that gets sent right back up the chain of command, and it's done. So the structure is decentralized, but yet it has leadership in place to be able to see the bigger picture and make the bigger decisions that affect that organization overall.
Yeah, how encumbered are you if you're going to pass through an area? And I'm not asking you specifically, just as an organization, if you're going to pass through an area, are you checking in? Are you engaging with a legitimate mayor to, reinforce whatever is being done above? Do you have to encounter these higher level cartel players? How does that work in terms of what's asked of the actual trafficker on a day-to-day basis? And then when you get to when does your responsibility stop and you've done your job and you're on to the next task?
Okay, as I wouldn't say an independent contractor, but just a low to mid level drug trafficker, have a pretty good sense of autonomy, meaning that I'm not bothered with the day to day politics of big cartel. I only get phone calls when there are specific issues in the area of operations that I function in. Now, these different plazas, I'll use Juarez, for example, because I've worked in that plaza for a long time. Those are plazas that are right now in contention. Three different groups want that area. None of them are going to be able to control that area due to the importance of the bridge getting into the United States. Everybody wants control of it. The way that I stay under the radar is I have aligned myself with a larger faction so that when I do move things back and forth across that bridge, there's a general sense of that's who that works with. Let's not create a problem with him unless we hear from a higher up that we need to go ahead and go after him. As far as operating with the different groups, there has been situations that weren't trafficking related that were more political and not meaning the traditional Mexican politics, but inter-cartel politics of somebody needs help or somebody needs something done. Just like any other business relationship, a favor for a favor, I'll help you now. And if I need something further on down the road, you'll help me out and we'll leave the bigger rivalries alone for the time being, and we'll do what needs to be done as long as it's mutually beneficial for both of us.
When you look at the independent nature of what someone like you does, how often does an opportunity come in to move something somewhere else? You have the ability, you've mapped it. Maybe they want you to move something along your route. Maybe they want to know how to move something somewhere else. How often are you working in another aspect of the traffic? And again, I'm not asking you specifically. I'm just saying in general from your experience, how often does something outside of the norm, your expertise apply to Afghanistan or somewhere like that?
Are you talking about moving something to or from Afghanistan or being in contact with the people in Afghanistan, or are you just using Afghanistan as a kind of a binder or the way that they work?
Yeah, I'm using Afghanistan as an example just because there's poppy to move, but also like when people are like, "Hey, I would like to move." Let's just say that someone wants to move something dangerous, explosives or whatever it's going to be, and they want to move that, or someone wants to open a new route, a competitive route into Mexico. Would they reach out to someone like you? Would they go through the cartel? How do the outside things happen, and how often does that happen from your experience?
Okay, it's rare that I personally receive any phone calls from a separate country having to deal with routes into the United States. However, I have had situations where people have wanted to use the routes that I have, and they base that off of two things. They base that off of your track record and what they see you lose on your routes and what they see you gain on your routes. And more importantly to them, how trustworthy are you? Meaning, if this is something that's advantageous to them and they might be doing a favor for somebody in order to further their business, are you going to get it done so that their word is in play? I generally don't see anything large, but I will say that apart from narcotics, things do move back and forth across that border. I mean, it's a fairly porous border. It's one of the, I believe it is the largest land border in the world. I know something crazy like 350 million like they cross that border every year. So it's not hard to move things across, and they know that, so they just pick whoever they feel would be able to best handle what it is that they're trying to move across. A note to that though, dealing with countries like Afghanistan, any country that has a terrorist nexus, I know they know what a special interest alien is and the things that go along with that, and we know that those are priorities for law enforcement in Washington D.C. And the people that I work with know to stay away from them. They are given different attention than, say, narcotics or normal immigrant.
So people that are registered as a threat with the U.S., you guys are going to try to avoid. Is there a scenario where a cartel grabs these people in order to gain some favor and some leniency with the U.S.? Or is that far fetched?
No, not at all. I mean, it's all about business, and once you get to the upper echelons of these organizations, politics feed into them the same way they would with Fortune 5 companies or big business in the United States and abroad. So a favor for a favor is what these people operate on. Believe me, if Chapo could have grabbed Osama bin Laden and traded him for his freedom, Osama bin Laden would be sitting in ADX right now as opposed to him.
Yeah, that's always the case, right? The other question I want to ask is a person at your level who's moving products. How dangerous is it for you day to day, wherever you're at in the world? How much over your shoulder are you looking, or is it more just like, hey, I wear a golf shirt and some chinos, and I go to work, and no one is any the wiser?
Right. Myself personally, the area that I'm in and the way that I operate, I don't see anything personally. Everything I do is via communication to somebody else. So for me, I enjoy a fair amount of safety. I am in the U.S. I can say that. So I don't have the cartel aspect of, again, going back to a parallel government of people watching me and saying, hey, what does this man do? How does he make his money? My biggest threat is U.S. law enforcement, uh, which there's a sweet spot in this industry, and everybody understands that if you are big enough to make a decent living, you can do it, but you stay small enough to not attract the attention of multiple agencies, then you can probably do this for a fairly long time. However, I will give it to the U.S. intelligence agency as well as the DA. They are very, very good at what they do, and even though you might be able to do it for a long time, you for sure will not be able to do it forever.
What does a comfortable living equal? I mean, because nowadays, if you learn to code, you can make 200 grand a year if you're really good at it. You can start your own company, potentially make millions of dollars. Is it something where you look around and go, man, I should just learn how to run a damn computer at the highest level?
Yeah, the days when you want to pull your hair out, absolutely. But it gets into your blood. It gets to the point that you're addicted more to getting away with what you're trying to get away with as opposed to the money. And then honestly, from my experience and the experiences that I've talked to with other people that are in this business, it no longer really becomes about money. It becomes about keeping score. And the money is just a way to show the competitor that you're winning.
Yeah, fair enough. I can see that being the case. I want to back out and let's talk about immigration and how. Let me before that. How much concern does a cartel have, or someone who works within that cartel have, for bringing in things like fentanyl that are killing people here in the U.S.? I mean, we lose a young person, I don't know, daily to that, and oftentimes someone famous. Tom Petty is dead due to fentanyl. Prince is dead due in part to fentanyl. George Floyd had fentanyl in the system, and probably none of them knew that going in. How much? How much does that weigh on anybody's conscience in that line of business?
From the U.S. side, being in the U.S., I would say that that is probably the number one threat to American security right now, whether or not somebody wants to admit it. From the Mexican side, I will tell you that the people that I talk to do not care. They have taken the stance of it's not Mexico. They're not forcing anybody to put that in their system or their body. They're poor. They don't care. They view Americans as being privileged to begin with, and they feel like if Americans decide to destroy themselves, then maybe they should live a little bit poorer of a life and experience what they had to experience. So there's a little bit of animosity that goes into that. But no, like they do not care. Nor do they care that China has been involved in this from the start. And do not remember his name. I wish I did. They had an officer in their military actually write a book on unconventional warfare and put this in there as a means to disrupt certain parts of the United States. And that's exactly what they're doing. If you go to Michoacan, Jalisco, Sinaloa, anywhere where they process fentanyl, none of the 50-gallon drums that I have ever seen have English on them. They were all written in Chinese.
Yeah, that's terrifying and understandable. I mean, there's a lot that America does that's crap for other people in other places. The fentanyl problem is huge. What does Mexico in general see in terms of a threat from China? It's one thing to partner with them on trafficking to undermine the U.S., but is it in any way helping Mexico? Are they worried about China, moving in and taking over or like that? I know we're over here in the U.S. We're desperately worried about what China's going to do.
Right. From what I have seen, no, they're not concerned with China, and I feel like that is because they are the next door neighbor to a superpower. And I feel like if there was any kind of threat pointed in the direction of Mexico, they feel like despite all the things that they do to provoke the United States, that the United States would stand in the way of that, knowing that Mexico is somewhat of a gateway into the United States. So I feel like the people who do deal with the Chinese, they deal with them on a strictly business level. They don't concern themselves with the animosities between the Chinese and the American governments. On top of that, you would kind of have to understand Mexican politics. Mexico City is extremely worried about secessionism from the northern part of Mexico. Geography dictates that a lot, and the northern states have more in common with the United States. There's long manufacturing, banking relationships with the United States and these border communities. So Mexico kind of has a little bit of a chip on its shoulder. So I feel like if they want to allow Chinese policies, politics, and drugs to run through their country, they don't have a problem with it. And if it were to grow out of control, they feel like the United States would step in.
I'm curious what you
I'm
think about
curious.
two different levels of question. The first one is we'll call it the small push. How would it impact the cartels if an American president said, "You guys present a clear and present danger. We're going to go ahead and park a brigade, 5,000 service members in Chihuahua, Mexico, the northern part of it, and we're just going to run interdiction operations until we feel like leaving." The other aspect is the big push. What if an American president said, "Anybody who lives north of Panama that wants to be part of America, stay where you are, raise a flag, and we're just going to come and we're going to annex all of Mexico and Central America"? How would either of these things impact, and how would the cartels feel about those pushes?
The small push, you would jeopardize small operations. So big cartel would just move around it. If you made a presence in Chihuahua, then they would just move through Tamaulipas. It would just create conflicts in different areas because you would shorten the available space and opportunity to get into the United States. The bigger push, the land in Veracruz where everybody lands. That's the key to Mexico. If you can take Veracruz and you can take Mexico City, then you take Mexico. If that were to happen, that is probably their worst nightmare because then the U.S. justice system would apply to them, and the U.S. justice system would not allow for bribery, which is the way that they have escaped punishment this long. So that would be everybody's worst nightmare in Central South and Mexico.
What about the population? Would they welcome that? I mean, people from Guadalajara are constantly coming north. I mean, all these different countries that are being mistreated, have no rule of law, have these shadow governments that are over them. would the regular working folk of these countries welcome the opportunity to join the U.S. in some kind of occupation, moving to statehood status over time?
That's a question that I don't feel qualified to answer, only because I'm not a Mexican citizen and I don't live there. So I don't have the opportunity to just see these people on a daily basis and get a feel for how they would feel. But if I were to make a guess at it, I would say that initially they wouldn't like it. Who does? Who would want to be told that you are now under a different flag? But if they saw real change in progress, I believe that any people would embrace that. I don't think that there would be as big a pushback as people may think. I think some of these people are fed up and they don't have a place to turn. You can't call the police. Those are owned by the cartels. You can't call your mayor. Those are owned by the cartels. The only people you can call is your family right now. And if you lack the resources and the weaponry to fight any of that, then you're at the mercy of other people. And I think if the U.S. were to step in, that would alleviate that pressure and allow them to call for help or have some semblance of security. So I highly doubt that 10 years from now, if that were to happen, that they would have a problem with it.
And then adding on to the big push question, do the cartels just go north and infiltrate Canada and push it? Because that's a ginormous international border.
I really can't speak on Canadian politics. However, I feel like they have such a close personal relationship with the United States and their policies are similar that they wouldn't be able to gain a foothold. My own personal opinion is the cartel problem started with the PRI. They had a really, really bad habit of incorporating their threats inside their political structure as opposed to dealing with it. And that's what allowed these criminal organizations to gain footholds. I feel like Canada, as vast as it is, wouldn't allow that.
How does trafficking impact immigration with the U.S.? I mean, we have this, just, I guess the best way to say it is a schizophrenic immigration policy where we do all kinds of crazy things and expect some kind of positive outcome. I don't understand any of it, left or right. Does trafficking of people and immigration, these are all separate little silos. How does that all work?
Well, if you want to get down to like the ground level of trafficking, that starts with people in regions who do not have any opportunity for advancement. Their governments have been corrupted. Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador. Their security situations, they're no longer safe. And honestly, in Central American countries, they play advertisements on the radio and say, we're the A1 traffickers. You will not get kidnapped, hurt, extorted. Any of the horror stories that you've heard, they don't happen with us. And that family scrapes their money together. And then they call these people and build those relationships have also been built over years. They are put in semi trucks and shipped from one point. You'll probably hit 4 different cities and 4 different locations until you actually reach the border. And each one of those locations, somebody is going to ask you for money and make you pay more than what you originally agreed on, and then come up here. As far as like the broader spectrum of of immigration, I don't have a clear answer to that problem. I feel like those problems originate in those countries due to poor government. And until you fix the government as a whole, I feel like it's a waste of time for the United States to continue to send money to these people and expect that they're going to do the right thing with it. So, short of what we had just talked about with military intervention, I do not see a solution to it. And we're going to continue to face that threat.
So, a military intervention, is there something else politically or socially that could be done? And then what would you do? Like, how would you handle this? And is this something that you can handle? Could you stop simultaneously the influx of fentanyl, the illegal immigration problem? Is there a way to wrap your hands around the whole thing?
I would say that there is a way to wrap your hands around specific issues. Fentanyl, uh, the first step that I would take if I were the US government was label these cartels terrorist organizations. If you did that, you free up funding and you allow the State Department, the Department of Defense, to begin to intervene instead of leaving it in the hands of the Justice Department. I'm not saying that the DEA isn't doing a good job. DPS, I've lost a lot of loads and spent a lot of money because of those people. They are good at what they do, but they are now dealing with organizations that have expanded globally. And in order to wrap your hands around that, you're going to need a global reach, which I understand the DEA has, but you're going to need something and a budget far greater than what they have. So that would be my first step, would be to label all of these organizations as terrorist organizations, and then pass that to supervision. The U.S., from what I've seen in Mexico, at least has a very hands-on, hands-off way of working. They will get hands-on when they need to focus on an individual, but as a whole, they're hands-off and still respect Mexican sovereignty. And I feel like that is a mistake. I feel like respecting sovereignty of any nation that has failed to protect its citizens, failed to address the large problems that are affecting U.S. Citizens, those need to be put in check. So I feel like they need to take a way more hands-on approach with them.
Some of what you just said broke up a little bit because of our connection. And just for everybody listening, this is just kind of how this has to be because of the way we have to record this. So we'll just bear with that for a while. I wanted to ask you about international influence. Okay, so we can make them all terrorist organizations, but then that also turns them into like, okay, well, then we're going to play the terrorism game and we're going to make money by moving the next thing. Like if we make it harder for them to make money moving drugs, maybe they move something worse, or maybe they just move more people or whatever it is. How international can this business become if we do turn them into a terrorist organization?
I guess that would all depend on how effectively you hit it from the beginning. These organizations are already transnational. Mexican cartels, specifically the two major ones, Cartel Jalisco and Cartel Sinaloa, have both not only ingrained themselves in Central and South American countries, but have expanded to Europe and Asian countries. So they already have the platform and the logistics in place to move anything that they would like back and forth. And I know right now, as it stands, everybody would like to stay away from the things that are going to bring down that hammer of the United States government. Drugs, people, yes, you will draw attention and you could pay a price for it if you start reaching out into other things, especially anything that has to do with any kind of NBC threat. Everybody stays away from those. And I just do not feel like they would jump into that if they were labeled a terrorist organization, because the money, at least the steady money, wouldn't be there. I feel like they would continue to work with drugs, people, extortion, stealing gas, oil. They would stay with it. You would just see a decrease in it. But I could be wrong.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to think through all these different aspects. I mean, there is kind of a detente of sorts where like, okay, we know you're doing this, we're going to make it hard for you to do it, but let's not make this worse. But there's also a lot of people suffering, because of our inability to turn this thing all the way off. Because ultimately, if we wanted to flex our military muscle, we could bring a carrier group into the Caribbean, stand and just go home base out of Veracruz and make it really hard to move around. But then again, if you have all the control. So is there a scenario where one of the cartel leaders just does the thing where they're like, I'm going to run for and I'm going to win election in Mexico and just run the whole damn country as a shadow government legitimately?
I don't know that somebody would want to do that, although they could. I mean, Pablo Escobar, that was one of his goals. I can tell you this right now, especially in Baja, Sonora, Sinaloa, the different factions will back political candidates and just make them puppets, which is kind of what we had talked about with the parallel governments. But no, I couldn't see the people in power in Mexico, Los Pinos, giving up that kind of control to one of these cartels. They, just like the cartels, are addicted to power, so I don't think that they would allow it to go that far.
When someone goes rogue and they kill a van full of Mormons, they burn women and babies alive in a car. That's bad for business. And that really can get you some American, probably did get some American incursions into the area, much more surgical. But you get too many vans full of Americans getting whacked, it's going to create a problem that a president is not going to mind stepping across the board with a lot of force. How is that stuff dealt with internally?
Okay, I know the case that you're speaking of. It depends on whether or not that's true. I will tell you what I know about that specific situation, and my information may be false because I was in America when that happened. But like I said, the plaza that I work out of is Juarez. And when that happened, it was all being blamed on a group from the Linea. And when that happened, Mexico did see U.S. personnel in Juarez. They saw checkpoints. Um, it was a large consensus of the people in that plaza that the people from the Linea didn't even do it. They had screamed that they didn't do it. They had blamed it on, believe it or not, and again, I do not know how true this is, but they blamed it on Trump. They came up with the conspiracy that Trump needed an excuse to say, we need border protection. I need a wall. And what better way to do that than dead white people? And so that was the consensus in that area. But if it were true, if, say, some of the people from the Linea did do what they were said to have done, then those people would not be around anymore. It's the same thing as if you were to mess with special interest aliens, if you were just bringing way too much attention to what we have going on, and you're not able to control yourself, so you would be around anymore.
Yeah, I can see that being the case. The infighting that happens between cartels too could be an area where Group A puts a hit on these Americans to make Group B look bad in order to affect some kind of operation. And maybe those Mormons pissed off the wrong people and said it was a good target. But how much does infighting how much does infighting impact business, or is there an agreement between these cartels that fighting is expensive and they'd all rather just make money?
It's it's right now it's the backbone of the cartels. That's why you have these smaller organizations. You can look at, say, Baja over in Tijuana. Cartel Ariano Felix is still operating over there, and they have infighting to the point that some of them work for Cartel Jalisco, some of them work for Cartel Sinaloa, and that's a constant ebb and flow depending on who it is that got killed and who stepped up to the plate and ran it. But it's a huge problem right now, and it's one that the larger cartels are trying to fix by incorporating these smaller groups into their organization, so to speak. But it's all about greed. If I feel like I can do a better job than you, then I already know people in the United States. I don't need you. I will just split away from your group and I will call myself cartel whatever. And then I will give some people that I can pay as sicarios, and now I have my own group. And then somebody might do that to me 2 years down the road. And that has gone on for years and years until you see what you have now, where the alliances are going to change from hour to hour, day to day, month to month.
How much do cartels care about? We have our social justice movement here in the United States. We're trying to understand ethnicity better. Do they give a damn about any of that? Do they care if drugs are being used against one ethnicity over another? Does that in any way impact their decision making?
No, not at all. Especially in America, again, they have somewhat of a bias and chip on their shoulder. So if it was a black person doing it as opposed to a white person, that's not going to make any bit of a difference to them. Their money still has Benjamin Franklin printed on it.
I kind of figured because it's about business, but I just wanted to ask because these are interesting questions that I believe people would have. I have other questions, but I also don't want to run out of time without asking you, what do you want to let us know? What's important that we understand that we've not covered?
We've covered generally most of it. I guess my main reason for doing this show would bring attention to the fact that there is a real danger south of this border. And I feel like people are not paying attention to it, nor do they understand it. I don't think they understand the violence. I don't think they understand the brutality of these organizations. And just from the basic human perspective, I mean, I feel like God made all of us, and those people have just as much of a right to security and happiness and well being as we do as Americans. And I feel like as Americans, as the bigger power, we have a responsibility to step in and correct the wrongs that we see being perpetrated in front of our eyes instead of playing the ostrich and just sticking our head in the sand.
I want to come back to that aspect, but I want to not forget to ask you this: how corruptible? Look, I've been down along the border in Texas from El Paso to, Del Rio, and there's a lot of open space. And every now and then, and I mean, it is for the audience, every now and then, not very often, you'll see one lone dude in a police vehicle just sitting there, a couple miles from the border, completely snatchable, completely, vulnerable. How hard is it to get someone just to either want to stay alive or just to take an extra 100 grand or something to look the other way when you drive by? Are they exploitable with cash or for threats?
A little bit there. You broke up a little bit there, but I think I understand the gist of the question. It's hard. It's not as easy as maybe Hollywood would want it to seem, but it's also not impossible. I can think of probably 3 or 4 cases right now in Texas of police being bribed. I've used one before for transportation. But they come down hard on those guys. And when they're found out, they pretty much have their lives torn apart. So it's few and far between. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I don't see it nearly as often as you would think.
Getting back to the like why you're doing the show, part of this, how dangerous is it for you to do this? How dangerous is your job on a day-to-day basis? How do you get the stain of being a drug trafficker off you when you're 60 years old and you have been out of the game for a while? It's easy to look at someone who does a work like this that kills people and say you're a horrible person. But in reality, we all do stuff. We all have things, and it could easily be me.
Right. I don't think it's the same that you can never wash off. I think that I'm going to have to stand before God one day, and I'm going to have to account for my sins, and that is not something I look forward to. Personally, I'm at a point now where I've come to realize the harm that I'm doing to my family, to other families, in the large scale. I understand the fact that in facilitating the movement of narcotics back and forth, I'm affecting somebody in New York, someone's kid who may or may not have been introduced to it. And I no longer believe in the axiom that most people in this business use of if it wasn't me, it'd be somebody else. Either way it goes, that person that was going to do the drug was going to do it anyway, so I might as well get the money. I feel like as a Christian, I have a responsibility to account for my actions on a day-to-day basis, and it's something I feel like I can no longer do, so I don't. And that was the reason for me doing the show is to get that information out there. Maybe somebody hearing this does have a solution or does have the ability to affect some kind of change in a small or big way. They're motivated to do that.
You're clearly an intelligent dude. You're well spoken. You just used axiom properly. It's all impressive. How did you get started? You don't got to go through the whole history, but how did you get started in this spot? And then how educated are you? I mean, it seems like you've got a brain in your shoulders. You really could do a lot of other stuff.
Um, I actually got my start. I was in the military and I got out of the military and I went to prison shortly after. And I did not grow up with money, although I did grow up with a family who took care of everything that I needed to take care of. So I wasn't a poor family. I can't claim that I was neglected because I wasn't. Um, but I saw all these people, and I went to prison for something really, really minor. I feel like it was something I may not should or I should not have been sent to prison for, and it wouldn't have sent me on this trajectory. Maybe a different path would have worked. But either way it went, I went to prison and I saw these guys and they talked about these beautiful women and these fast cars and these pockets full of money. And I said, "How do you get it?" And they said, "We sold drugs." And I said, "Well, that's what I want to do."
Yeah, our correction system wins again. It turns somebody, but we didn't have to be a drug trafficker into a drug trafficker. But again, like the axiom, if not you, there was some other kid that was going to happen to. When you look at everything and you stack it all up, if you look at yourself in 10 years and you're still trafficking, you haven't managed to get away because it's a dangerous job to leave, or you just can't, you keep getting pulled back in. What do you say to your future self if you're still doing this in 10 years?
Shame on you. I actually do not do it anymore. Just personally had made a promise to God that I would no longer do these things and I would try to undo the things that I've done. And I have found out that it is so much harder to go against that grain than to go with it. But anybody who I would say continues to do them and works under the assumption that they are not going to be held accountable for their actions one day is extremely mistaken.
Yeah, fair enough. A whole hour full of questions, and I don't want to keep you any longer than this. Definitely would love to talk to you some more in the future about this, but it's just eye opening to hear someone who's rational and understands the damage they're doing, wanting to make good on it. What what's how do you do it though? How do you make amends? How do you do your acts of contrition to balance the scale a little bit? What do you have to do that?
For me personally, I don't have an answer to that. Still trying to figure that out. But my goal is to go against these groups and to make it as hard as possible for them to operate in the areas that they're operating in. And how to do that, I don't know. I'm still trying to find that out. But in whatever way I can, I plan to go against them instead of being with them this time.
Well, listen, I appreciate you coming on the Super interesting to talk to you, and I don't want to take any more of your time. I want to let you get back to it, but thank you very much for coming on. I'll turn the mic back over to you real quick, and then I'm going to run my roll that closes out the show. So to say whatever your final words are, and then we'll move on to the next thing.
No, absolutely. To anybody that's out there that's listening, I appreciate listening, and I hope that this opens your eyes to the situation that is taking place down there.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much.